I'd always prided myself on respecting boundaries. When my daughter Claire married Stephen Whitmore 5 years ago, I smiled through the elaborate ceremony despite my reservations. I kept my concerns to myself when she moved into the sprawling Whitmore family estate instead of establishing her own home with her new husband. I even bit my tongue when she gradually withdrew from the journalism career she'd once been so passionate about. After all, Claire was 32 years old, a grown woman capable of making her own choices. Who was I to question her decisions? But as I drove through the blinding snow on Christmas Eve, knuckles white against the steering wheel, I could no longer pretend that what was happening was normal or healthy. The daughter who once called me daily now barely responded to texts. The vibrant, opinionated journalist who'd fearlessly covered political corruption and social injustice had been replaced by a subdued woman who checked with her husband before voicing an opinion. The final straw had come 3 days earlier. A brief text message, not even from Claire's phone but from Stephen's. Claire is fully committed to Whitmore family Christmas traditions this year. Perhaps you can visit briefly after the holidays if our schedule permits. Our schedule permits. As if my own daughter needed her husband's family's permission to see her mother on Christmas. The snow intensified as I navigated the winding roads leading to the exclusive Whitmore estate in Boston's wealthiest suburb. The gates stood open, unusual for a family so obsessed with security and privacy, but convenient for my unannounced arrival. As I pulled into the circular driveway, the mansion loomed before me, windows glowing warmly against the snowy darkness, smoke curling from multiple chimneys. I was about to park when a solitary figure on the front walkway caught my attention. Even through the swirling snow, I recognized my daughter immediately. The particular way she held her shoulders, the tilt of her head. But something was terribly wrong. Claire was sitting alone on the edge of the walkway, dressed only in what appeared to be a cocktail dress. No coat, no scarf, nothing to protect her from the brutal cold. I abandoned my car in the driveway, half running, half sliding across the icy pavement toward her. "Claire," I called, my voice nearly lost in the wind. "Claire, what are you doing out here?" She looked up, her face pale with cold, lips tinged an alarming blue. For a moment, she didn't seem to recognize me, her eyes vacant and unfocused. Then awareness dawned. "Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking. "What are you? How did you?" I dropped to my knees beside her, already shrugging off my heavy wool coat to wrap around her trembling shoulders. "My God, you're freezing. How long have you been out here?" "I don't know," she mumbled, her words slightly slurred from cold. "An hour. Maybe 2. 2 hours in this weather without a coat." Horror and rage battled within me as I helped her to her feet. "Why are you outside, Claire?" Her eyes darted toward the house, fear flickering across her features. I spoke out of turn at dinner, questioned Douglas's business practices. Stephen said I needed to reflect on my place in this family before I could rejoin the celebration. My blood ran cold, colder than the snow, swirling around us. Through the large bay windows, I could see the Whitmore family gathered in their opulent living room, laughing and drinking beside a roaring fire, completely indifferent to the woman freezing just outside there. "Or you could have died out here," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Do you understand that? This isn't discipline, Claire. This is cruelty." "It's their way," she whispered, tremors racking her body. "Women in the Whitmore family are expected to show absolute respect and deference. I knew the rules. In that moment I saw with perfect clarity what had been happening these past 5 years. The gradual isolation, the subtle undermining of Claire's confidence, the systematic dismantling of her independence, all orchestrated by a family of men who viewed women as decorative possessions rather than equal partners. "Can you walk?" I asked, supporting her weight as she swayed unsteadily. "I think so," she nodded, though she leaned heavily against me. "But Mom, I can't leave. Stephen will be furious. And Douglas, I'm not asking permission from any Whitmore man." I cut her off, steel entering my voice. "You're coming inside at minimum to warm up and change clothes. Then we'll figure out next steps." She didn't protest further, which frightened me more than her words had. The Claire I'd raised would have argued, would have defended her own agency. This new Claire, this diminished version of my daughter, simply acquiesced. As we approached the imposing front door, I could see the family more clearly through the windows. Stephen laughing with his brothers, the patriarch Douglas holding court from his armchair, the women arranged decoratively around the room like well-dressed props. None of them had bothered to check on Claire. She didn't. Using the key Claire still clutched in her frozen hand, I unlocked the door and helped her inside. The blast of warmth was almost painful after the bitter cold outside. Our entrance caused an immediate disruption. The Christmas music playing through hidden speakers seemed suddenly too loud in the abrupt silence. 7 pairs of eyes turned toward us, shocked, affronted, and in Stephen's case, quickly transitioning from surprise to carefully manufactured concern. "Claire, darling," he said, rising from his place by the fire, and approaching with an expression of solicitude that didn't reach his eyes. "I was just about to check on you. Have you had time to reconsider your behavior?" "She's suffering from hypothermia," I said. Before Claire could respond, "She needs warm clothes and possibly medical attention, not a performance review." Douglas Whitmore stood then, a tall, imposing figure with silver hair and cold eyes. The family patriarch's expression was one of mild annoyance, as if I were a delivery person who had used the front entrance instead of the service door. "Pauline," he acknowledged with the barest nod. "This is an unexpected intrusion on our family Christmas. Claire understands that there are consequences for disrespect in this household." "Consequences," I repeated, incredul, sharpening my tone. She could have developed hypothermia or frostbite. There. Over a dinner conversation. Stephen stepped forward, placing a proprietary hand on Claire's shoulder. "Mom, you don't understand our family dynamics. Claire and I should discuss this privately." I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. Beyond the physical trembling from cold, I saw a deeper trembling in her spirit. The vibrant light that had always defined her was dimmed to the faintest flicker. Whatever had been happening in this house over the past 5 years had nearly extinguished the essence of who she was. That's when I knew I couldn't leave without her. Not tonight. Not ever again. I straightened to my full height, meeting Douglas Whitmore's cold gaze directly. In that moment, I wasn't just Pauline Bennett, concerned mother. I was Pauline Bennett, senior business consultant who had spent decades navigating corporate power structures and recognizing the weak points in seemingly impenetrable empires, including the Whitmore family empire. Gathered Claire closer to me and looked each family member in the eye, one by one, before delivering 5 words that would change everything. "I know about Project Prometheus." The effect was immediate. Douglas's face drained of color. Stephen froze mid-step. The two other Whitmore brothers exchanged alarmed glances. Even the normally placid Whitmore wives looked up in surprise at the sudden tension crackling through the room. Project Prometheus. The Whitmore family's most carefully guarded secret. A series of offshore accounts and shell companies designed to hide millions in questionable transactions. Information I had discovered years ago while vetting my daughter's future in-laws and had kept to myself, hoping I would never need to use it until now. "We're leaving," I said into the stunned silence. "Claire needs medical attention and rest. We can discuss everything else tomorrow." No one moved to stop us as I guided my trembling daughter toward the door. No one dared. The drive to the hotel was harrowing. Snow accumulating faster than the wipers could clear it. Claire's teeth chattering despite the car's heater blasting at maximum. I kept glancing over at her, bundled in my coat and the emergency blanket from my trunk. Her face still frightfully pale. "We should get you to a hospital," I said, peering anxiously through the windshield at the nearly invisible road. "No hospitals," Claire replied, her voice stronger than it had been outside the Whitmore mansion but still unsteady. "Please, Mom, I just need to warm up. I can't handle questions right now," but I wanted to argue, but recognized the fragility in her expression. Whatever had happened in that house had left wounds deeper than the physical effects of cold. Pushing too hard now might cause her to retreat entirely. "The Rosewood Inn has vacancies," I said instead. Called ahead while packing for the trip just in case. Claire didn't respond, staring out the passenger window at the swirling no. The silence between us felt both familiar and strange. The comfortable quiet of mother and daughter who know each other deeply overlaid with the tension of years of growing separation. "How did you know?" she finally asked as we pulled into the hotel's covered entrance. "About Project Prometheus." Turned off the engine and faced her. "I'm a business consultant, Claire. When you got engaged, I did what any mother with my resources would do. I researched the family you were marrying into. You investigated the Whiters." Her eyes widened slightly. "I looked into their business practices," I clarified. "Stephen seemed controlling even during your engagement. I wanted to understand what I was dealing with." A flicker of the old Claire, sharp, analytical, unafraid of difficult truths, sparked in her expression. "And you found Project Prometheus among other things," I nodded. "Offshore accounts in the Caymans, shell companies in Luxembourg and Singapore, environmental violations, carefully buried under settlements with non-disclosure agreements. The Whites built their fortune on corruption and intimidation, all while maintaining their public image as moral, upstanding citizens. Douglas would say it's just smart business," Claire said, a hint of bitterness creeping into her voice. "Douglas would say anything to justify his actions," I countered, "just like he'd justify leaving his daughter-in-law in freezing temperatures as discipline." Claire flinched, then seemed to collapse in on herself, shrinking into the passenger seat. "You don't understand how it works in their family." "Then help me understand, Claire, because from where I'm sitting, it looks like systematic emotional abuse masked as tradition or family values." The word abuse hung in the air between us. Claire's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head sharply, wiping them away before they could fall. "Let's get inside," she said, her voice tight. "I can't do this conversation in a car." The Rosewood Inn was one of those New England establishments that balanced luxury with coziness. Crackling fireplaces in the lobby, tasteful Christmas decorations that managed to be festive without garishness, staff who were attentive without hovering, The night manager took one look at Claire's still pale face and disheveled appearance and upgraded us to a suite without my having to ask. The restaurant is closed, but we can send up room service, he assured us. And the chef left mulled wine warming for guests returning late from Christmas events. In the suite, Claire headed straight for the bathroom, turning the shower to its hottest setting. I heard her soft gasp as she finally began to warm up properly, and busied myself ordering food, hearty soup, fresh bread, hot tea, anything to raise her core temperature and provide comfort. When she emerged 20 minutes later, wrapped in one of the hotel's plush robes, some color had returned to her cheeks. She looked younger somehow, more like the daughter I remembered her. Carefully styled Whitmore wife hair now hanging in damp waves around her face. Better? I asked, pouring her a cup of the mulled wine that had been delivered. Much, she admitted, accepting the cup and inhaling the spicy aroma before taking a cautious sip. Thank you for coming tonight, for knowing somehow that I needed help. A mother knows, I said simply. She settled into the armchair across from mine, drawing her knees up like she used to as a teenager when we'd have our deepest conversations. For a moment, I could almost pretend the last 5 years hadn't happened, that we were just having one of our heart-to-hearts about life and its challenges. But the haunted look in her eyes told a different story. When did it start? As gently. The isolation, the control. Claire stared into her cup as if the floating cinnamon sticks and orange slices might provide an easier answer than the truth. She finally said. So gradually, I hardly noticed. At first, Stephen was so different during our courtship. Attentive, supportive of my career, interested in my opinions, and after the wedding it was subtle at first. Little comments about my friends being too progressive or bad influences, suggestions that maybe my journalism was too stressful, that I seemed tired all the time. Then it was Douglas making remarks about Whitmore women and their priorities, with Stephen nodding along. She took another sip of wine, her hands steadier now. By our first anniversary, I was having dinner with the family every night. By our second, I'd cut my work hours to part-time and lost touch with most of my friends. By our third, I'd quit journalism entirely and moved fully into the family compound. Didn't you say something? Call me. I would have helped Claire. She looked up then, pain evident in her expression. They made it so clear that you weren't appropriate. Your independence, your career, your divorce. Everything about you represented what Whitmore women should not be. Stephen said your influence had made it harder for me to adapt to real family life. The casual cruelty of it stung, but I pushed past my own hurt to focus on what mattered. And tonight, what happened that led to you sitting in the snow? Claire's shoulders tensed. Douglas was talking about a new development project. Luxury condos where a low-income housing complex currently stands. I'd seen articles about it in my old newspaper. The residents are being forced out with minimal compensation, and there are allegations of bribes to city officials to expedite permits. And you said something. I suggested that perhaps the family should consider the ethical implications, not just the profit margins. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. The old Claire coming out. I suppose Douglas wasn't pleased. He said, women shouldn't concern themselves with business matters they couldn't possibly understand. So you were sent outside as punishment, I concluded, struggling to keep the fury from my voice. To reflect on my place in the family, she corrected. The robotic phrasing clearly not her own until I was ready to apologize appropriately. And if you'd gotten frostbite, hypothermia, Would that have been acceptable collateral damage for ensuring your proper place? Claire didn't answer, which was answer enough. A knock at the door announced the arrival of our food. As I arranged the soup and bread on the small dining table, I noticed Claire checking her phone, her expression growing increasingly anxious. 27 texts from Stephen, she said, her voice tight. 5 from Douglas. They're not happy. I imagine not, I replied, setting a steaming bowl in front of her. First, we'll deal with the whites tomorrow. She hesitated, thumb hovering over the phone screen. What if they come here? Stephen can be very persuasive when he wants to be. Let him try, I said, steel entering my voice that surprised even me. I've spent 30 years helping companies navigate crises and negotiations. I can handle one family of corrupt businessmen who think they're above the law. As Claire began to eat, some color returning to her face with each spoonful of soup, I watched her carefully. The daughter I'd raised, brilliant, compassionate, fiercely independent, was still in there somewhere, buried beneath years of systematic undermining and control, and I was determined to help her find herself again, no matter what the Moors might try to do to stop us. Morning arrived with clear skies and brilliant sunshine that belied the storm of the previous night, both the literal snowstorm and the emotional tempest at the Whitmore mansion. I woke early, years of habit preventing me from sleeping past 6. Even on Christmas Day, Claire was still asleep in the adjoining room of our suite, her breathing deep and regular, face peaceful in a way I hadn't seen in years. I ordered breakfast from room service and settled at the small desk with my laptop. If the Whiters were going to retaliate, and I had no doubt they would, I needed to be prepared. Project Prometheus was my leverage. But leveraging information effectively required precision and timing. The documentation was exactly where I'd stored it 5 years ago, in an encrypted cloud folder with a password that combined Claire's birth date and the coordinates of the small Maine cottage, where I'd taken her every summer as a child. Page after page of damning evidence, falsified environmental impact studies, wire transfers to offshore accounts coinciding perfectly with favorable zoning decisions, shell companies that traced back to Douglas Whitmore through a labyrinth of nominees and proxies. I was so absorbed in reviewing the files that I didn't notice Claire had awakened until she spoke from behind me. You really do have it all, she said, her voice still rough with sleep. Evidence that could destroy them. I closed the laptop and turned to face her. In the morning light, I could see more clearly what last night's darkness and emotional turmoil had partially hidden. The physical toll the Whitmore household had taken on my daughter. She'd always been slender, but now she appeared almost fragile, cheekbones too prominent in her pale face. Dark circles underscored her eyes, and a general air of watchfulness had replaced her once relaxed demeanor. I do, I confirmed, gesturing for her to join me at the table where breakfast awaited. I compiled it when you first got engaged, then updated it periodically through my industry contacts. Why didn't you use it? She asked, taking a seat and reaching for coffee pot. Stop the wedding. Warn me. I measured my words carefully. But you have believed me. You were in love, Claire. Stephen showed you exactly what you wanted to see. If I'd come to you with accusations and evidence against his family, you would have seen it as me trying to control you or sabotage your happiness. She considered this as she stirred cream into her coffee, then nodded slowly. You're right. I would have chosen him over you. That's exactly what they wanted. What do you mean? It's how they operate. Isolating the women who marry into the family, cutting them off from outside influences, especially strong mothers or sisters who might notice what's happening. She took a sip of coffee, her gaze distant. Ella Laner told me once, when she'd had too much wine, that Douglas spent the first 2 years of their marriage systematically turning her against her own mother. Eleanor, Stephen's mother, Douglas's wife of nearly 40 years. The perfect Whitmore matriarch, always immaculately dressed, unfailingly polite, and completely differential to her husband in all things. And the other wives, Michael and Richard's wives, feel the same way. Claire nodded. Diane and Jennifer went through the same process. It's like breaking in a horse. First, they isolate you from outside support. Then they undermine your confidence and independence. Then they establish the rules and the consequences for breaking. Anger flared hot in my chest, but I kept my expression neutral. Getting emotional now wouldn't help Claire. No one ever leaves, fights back. There was one, Richard's first wife, Meredith. She tried to leave about a decade ago. The Whitmores destroyed her, used their connections to get her fired from her job, contested custody of their son so aggressively that she ran out of money for legal fees, spread rumors that ruined her reputation locally. Claire's hands tightened around her coffee cup. She eventually gave up, left town with nothing. Richard got full custody. Their son barely remembers her now. The systematic cruelty of it was breathtaking. A family that presented itself as the pinnacle of moral virtue and traditional values while practicing calculated psychological warfare against the women who married into it. Your phone's been buzzing all morning, I observed, nodding toward where it lay on the nightstand. Stephen and Douglas and Ella Laner, even Richard and Michael have texted. She made no move to check the messages. They'll be crafting a unified response. The Whiters always close ranks when threatened. Are you afraid of them? Asked directly. Claire considered the question. Something shifting in her expression, a hardness appearing beneath the fragility. She admitted, but I'm more afraid of going back, of who I've become in that house. Her words hung between us, raw with honesty. For the first time since I'd found her trembling on that snowy walkway, I felt a flicker of hope. My daughter, my real daughter, was still in there fighting to emerge. What do you want to do, Claire? I asked quietly. Has to be your decision. She looked out the window at the sunlight sparkling off fresh snow, her profile etched against the brightness. In that moment, I could see both the little girl she had been and the strong woman she could become. Again, if she chose to reclaim herself. I want out, she said finally, turning back to me with newfound resolve. Completely out. Not just away for Christmas, not just a temporary separation. I want a divorce. And I want nothing to do with any Whitmore ever again. They won't make easy, I cautioned. You've seen what they did to Meredith. No. That's why I need your help. She leaned forward, a spark of her old intensity returning. And your evidence. Before I could respond, a sharp knock at the door interrupted us. Not the gentle tap of housekeeping or room service, but the authoritative rap of someone who expected immediate attention. Claire froze, her face draining of color. She whispered. They found us. I rose calmly, smoothing my sweater. Let them come, I said, finding a strength in my voice that matched the resolve hardening within me. We knew they would. Through the peephole I saw exactly what I expected. Stephen Whitmore, impeccably dressed despite the early hour. His handsome face set in an expression of concerned determination. Beside him stood his father, Douglas, silver-haired and imposing in a camel haircoat that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Behind them, a third man I didn't immediately recognize, likely one of the Whitmore family lawyers, brought along to add legal weight to whatever pressure they planned to apply. I opened the door but remained firmly in the threshold, blocking their entry to the suite. "Pauline," Douglas acknowledged with a curt nod. "We've come for Claire. This has been an unfortunate misunderstanding that we'd prefer to resolve privately as family." "Claire isn't receiving visitors at the moment," I replied pleasantly, as if declining a routine social call. Stephen stepped forward, his practiced smile not reaching his eyes. "I understand you're concerned, Pauline. But Claire is my wife. She belongs at home, especially on Christmas morning. Our family has traditions like leaving women to freeze in snowstorms when they express opinions." I interrupted, my tone still conversational despite the barb. Douglas's jaw tightened. "What happens in our family is not your concern. My daughter's welfare is very much my concern," I countered. "And Claire has made it clear she's not returning with you today." "I'd like to hear that from Claire herself," Stephen insisted, trying to look past me into the suite. I felt a presence at my shoulder, and turned to find Claire standing beside me. She'd thrown on jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, a far cry from the carefully coiffed Whitmore wife she'd been molded into. Even in casual clothes, even still pale and tired, she stood straighter than I'd seen her stand in years. "I'm not coming home, Stephen," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Not today, not ever." The facade of concerned husband slipped, revealing a flash of the controlling man beneath. "Don't be ridiculous, Claire. Whatever issues you're having, we can discuss them at home. Your place is with me, with our family. The family that left me outside in freezing temperatures as punishment for expressing an opinion." She raised her chin slightly. "Think I finally understood what my place in the Whitmore family truly is, and I want no part of it anymore." Douglas stepped forward, his considerable height allowing him to loom over both Claire and me. "This is your mother's influence," he said coldly. "One night with her and you're suddenly abandoning 5 years of marriage and the values we've worked so hard to instill in you." Claire didn't flinch from his intimidating presence. "The only thing last night did was show me there are still people in this world who won't stand by while I'm being mistreated, who won't accept cruelty as tradition or control as love." Third man cleared his throat, stepping forward with the smooth confidence of an expensive attorney. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Edward Harrington, the family's legal counsel. I should advise you that leaving the marital home without cause could be construed as abandonment in divorce proceedings, could significantly impact any financial settlement or division of assets." "Without cause," I echoed incredulously. "She was left outside in below freezing temperatures as discipline. I'd say that constitutes cause, a family disagreement that has been grossly mischaracterized," the lawyer replied smoothly. "There are no witnesses to support such an extreme claim." Claire's hand found mine, squeezing tightly. I squeezed back a silent promise of support. "This conversation is over," I said firmly. "Claire has made her decision. Suggest you respect it." "This isn't over," Stephen said, dropping all pretense of concern. "Claire, think about what you're throwing away. Think about the consequences." "Is that a threat?" I asked, arching an brow. Douglas placed a restraining hand on his son's arm. "Merely a reminder of reality," he said smoothly. decisions have consequences. Claire has been part of our family long enough to understand how we protect our interests. And I've been protecting my daughter's interests her entire life, I replied, still entering my voice. Perhaps it's time for you to understand what that means. With that, I closed the door firmly in their faces, turning the deadbolt with a decisive click. Claire let out a shaky breath, leaning against the wall. They'll be back with more lawyers, maybe. Even police with some manufactured concern about my mental state. Let them come, I said, returning to my laptop. We'll be ready. Because what the Whites didn't realize was that they had just declared war on a woman who had spent her entire career strategizing, planning, and prevailing against much more formidable opponents than one corrupt family with delusions of untouchability. And I never started a battle I didn't intend to win. We need to move, I said, already gathering our belongings. They'll likely try to establish a legal foothold. Perhaps an emergency custody hearing claiming you're mentally unstable, or a wellness check from local police officers who golf with Douglas. Claire nodded, throwing items into her overnight bag with practiced efficiency. Where will we go? They know your address in Cambridge. Not Cambridge, I said mentally, reviewing options. I have a colleague who keeps a pater in Back Bay for business trips. She's in London for the holidays. We can use it until we formulate a longer-term plan. As Claire packed, I made 3 phone calls in rapid succession. First to my colleague securing her apartment, then to Marcus Delgado, a former client who had become the best digital security specialist in Boston, and finally to Diane Abernathy, the most ruthless divorce attorney I knew. It's Christmas Day, Claire pointed out as I ended the last call. How do you still have this kind of pull with people? I smiled grimly. 25 years of building a reputation for never asking for favors unless it's important and always repaying them generously when due. Diane's meeting us at the apartment in 2 hours. We left through the hotel service entrance, avoiding the lobby where Douglas might have stationed someone to watch for us. My nondescript silver Volvo was thankfully unremarkable among the dozens of cars in the parking lot. As we pulled away, I noticed a black SUV with tinted windows idling near the entrance. Unmistakably Whitmore surveillance. They're watching the front, Claire observed, slouching down in her seat slightly. But not expecting us to leave so quickly, I replied, taking a circuitous route that would make it difficult for anyone to follow. That's the first advantage of dealing with entitled men like they. They consistently underestimate women's competence. I forgot how strategic you are, Claire said, something like admiration creeping into her voice. Douglas always dismissed you as just a consultant who got lucky with a few clients. Another advantage, I noted, being underestimated provides excellent cover for outmaneuvering people. My colleague's apartment was a sleek, minimalist space on the 15th floor of a luxury building with excellent security, key card access for the elevator, 24-hour doorman, and a discreet side entrance for residents who preferred privacy. We settled in just as Marcus arrived, carrying a nondescript duffel bag filled with technology. Damn, Pauline, when you said emergency you weren't kidding, he said, setting up his equipment on the dining table. Christmas Day extraction from hostel situation. This is some Jason Bourne level stuff. This is my daughter Claire, I introduced, appreciating his attempt to lighten the mood. Claire, Marcus is going to sweep for any tracking software on your phone and establish secure communications for us. Claire handed over her phone wearily. They can track me through my phone if they've installed Spyware. Absolutely. Marcus confirmed, already connecting her device to his laptop. Given what your mom briefly explained about these guys, I'd be surprised if they haven't. While Marcus worked, I briefed Claire on what to expect from Diane. She's not warm and fuzzy, but she's devastatingly effective. She specializes in high-conflict divorces involving powerful men who think they're untouchable. Will she take my case? I don't have money of my own anymore, Claire said, the reminder of her financial dependence making her voice tight. Stephen controls all our accounts. Diane owes me several favors, and she despises men who use financial control as a weapon. Trust me, she'll take your case. Marcus let out a low whistle from the dining table. Found it. 2 different tracking apps on your phone. Plus, they've been monitoring all your texts, calls, and emails. He glanced up, his expression serious. They've had complete surveillance of your digital life. They even have access to your microphone and camera. Claire's face palled. They've been listening to my conversations, watching me potentially. Yes, Marcus confirmed. And there's more. Your Apple ID has been set up to share your location continuously with 3 different accounts, all Whitmore emails. The violation was so complete, so invasive that for a moment even I was speechless. Claire sank onto the sofa, hands trembling slightly. Can you remove it all? Asked Marcus. Already on it. But I'd recommend a complete digital reset. New phone, new accounts, new everything. He worked as he spoke, fingers flying across his keyboard. I'll set up encrypted communication channels for both of you. Email, messaging, the works, and I'll create some digital false trails to keep them busy while you figure out next steps. When Diane arrived 40 minutes later, she brought with her an energy that immediately transformed the apartment's atmosphere. Tall, impeccably dressed even on Christmas Day, with a silver streak in her dark hair and piercing eyes that missed nothing. She commanded attention without effort. Lean. She greeted me with a brief hug before turning to Claire. And you must be the woman escaping from Boston's most self-righteous family of hypocrites. Claire blinked, startled by the direct assessment. You know the Whiters. I've had the distinct displeasure, Diane confirmed, setting her briefcase on the coffee table and extracting a tablet. Crossed paths with them in 3 different divorce cases over the years. Each time they deployed the same playbook: character assassination, financial strangulation, and strategic intimidation. She looked Claire over with a professional assessment that was neither judgmental nor pitying. Your mother says you want out completely. Well, reconciliation, no mediation, clean break. Is that accurate? Yes, Claire said firmly. I won't go back to that house or that life. Good clarity helps. Diane tapped her tablet to life. Now, before we discuss strategy, I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Tell me everything. The control tactics, the isolation methods, the punishment systems, and especially any witnesses or evidence we might be able to leverage. For the next hour, Claire detailed her 5-year descent into the Whitmore family's web of control. As she spoke, her voice grew steadier, her perspective clearer, as if the simple act of articulating the manipulation helped her see it more objectively. Diane took notes, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed her extensive experience with similar cases. Classic high-control family system, she concluded when Claire finished. They operate like a cult with Douglas as the unquestioned leader and the daughters-in-law as the most recent recruits to be indoctrinated. Can we win against them? Claire asked, the question that clearly weighed heaviest on her mind. They have so much money, so many connections. Diane's smile was sharp as a scalpel. Money and connections matter, but they're not everything. What we need is leverage, something they value more than the satisfaction of punishing you for leaving. That was my cue. I have substantial evidence of the Whitmore family's business improprieties, I explained, opening my laptop to show Diane the Project Prometheus files. Offshore accounts, bribes to officials, environmental violations, tax evasion. Enough to trigger multiple federal investigations. Diane reviewed the documentation, her expression growing increasingly satisfied. This is exceptional leverage, she agreed, but we need to be strategic about using it. The moment they know we have this, they'll pull out all the stops to discredit both of you. They're already planning to. Claire said, I know their playbook. They'll claim I'm having a mental breakdown. That Mom has always been jealous of their family and poisoned me against them. That I'm unstable and need to be brought home for my own good. Then we need to establish your mental competence immediately, Diane decided. I'll arrange for an independent psychological evaluation tomorrow. We'll also file for an emergency restraining order based on last night's incident. The hypothermia risk alone should be sufficient grounds. They'll deny it happened, Claire pointed out. It will be my word against the entire family's. Not necessarily, I interjected, remembering something. The Whitmore mansion has security cameras covering the entire property, including the front walkway, where they left you. If we can get that footage, they'll have deleted it by now, Claire said. Marcus looked up from his computer. Maybe not. Most high-end security systems back up to cloud storage automatically. If I can get into their network, he paused, considering its legally gray area. But given the circumstances, focus on legal approaches first, Diane cautioned. We need to file the emergency restraining order tonight before they can get ahead of us with their own legal maneuvers. I'll draft my statement about finding Claire last night, I offered. And I'll document the physical symptoms of exposure I observed. Marcus added, as a witness who saw her condition when you arrived at the hotel. Claire watched this rapid mobilization of support with a strange expression somewhere between disbelief and dawning hope. They always said I had no one but them. She said quietly that without the Whitmore name and connections, I would be nothing. I moved to sit beside her on the sofa, taking her cold hands in mine. They lied. Claire, you have always had people who value you for yourself, not your status, not your compliance, not your willingness to diminish yourself to fit their mold. Diane checked her watch. The judge who's on call for emergency filings today is Alexandra Winters. She's fair, thorough, and notably unsympathetic to claims of family tradition when they mask abuse. If we submit within the next 2 hours, she'll likely review it today, even though it's Christmas. As everyone moved into action, Diane drafting legal documents, Marcus securing our digital footprint, Claire writing her statement, I felt a fierce pride rise in my chest. Less than 24 hours after finding my daughter trembling in the snow, we had assembled a team, secured a safe location, and were already mounting a legal counter-offensive against one of Boston's most powerful families. Whites had spent 5 years systematically convincing Claire she was powerless without them. They were about to discover just how wrong they'd been. And Douglas Whitmore was about to learn that the just a consultant he had so casually dismissed was in fact the most formidable opponent he had ever faced. Judge Alexandra Winters granted the emergency restraining order at 7:42 p.m. on Christmas Day. Diane's efficient network ensured that copies were delivered to the Whitmore mansion and personally served to Stephen before 9 o'clock p.m. A small but significant victory that established the first legal boundary between Claire and the family that had systematically isolated her. "It's temporary," Diane cautioned as she reported back to us. 10 days of protection while the court schedules a full hearing. But it prevents Stephen or any Whitmore from coming within 500 feet of Claire or attempting to contact her directly. "They'll fight it," Claire said, huddled in an oversized sweater I'd purchased during our brief shopping excursion that afternoon. After 5 years of Whitmore-approved designer clothing, she'd gravitated toward comfort, soft fabrics, practical cuts, nothing that resembled the carefully curated wardrobe Stephen had insisted upon. "Course they will," Diane agreed. "But fighting it requires them to present their side in court under oath, explaining why they think it's acceptable to lock a family member outside in freezing temperatures as discipline." Marcus glanced up from his laptop. "Speaking of evidence, I've got something. The Whitmore security system backs up to a secure cloud server, as I suspected. And while I couldn't access it directly, I did find that the system automatically sends daily activity reports to the family's head of security, Miles Pfizer." Claire supplied. "Former military, completely loyal to Douglas." "The very same," Marcus confirmed. "But Mr. Pfizer has rather predictable password habits. I was able to access his email account and he swiveled his laptop to show us. Here's yesterday's security report, complete with timestamps and screenshots of all exterior camera activations." A screen showed a series of images from the previous night, including a crystal-clear shot of Claire sitting on the walkway, arms wrapped around herself, visibly shivering in the falling snow. The timestamp showed 7:24 p.m., meaning she had indeed been outside for well over an hour before I arrived. "Send that to me immediately," Diane instructed, her expression grim but satisfied. "This undercuts any attempt they might make to deny the incident occurred." Claire stared at the image of herself, a complex mix of emotions crossing her face. "It's strange," she said quietly, "seeing it from the outside like this. When you're in it, you start to think maybe it's normal, maybe you deserve it. Looking at that picture, it's clear psychological abuse." I finished for her, anger rising again at what had been done to my daughter. "And it wasn't the first time, was it?" She shook her head. "Different methods but the same principle. Isolation as punishment for any perceived defiance or disrespect. Usually, it was being confined to my room without dinner or being excluded from family events. This was the first time they'd put me physically outside in dangerous weather." Escalation, Diane noted, making another entry on her tablet. "Classic pattern in controlling relationships. The boundaries of what constitutes acceptable punishment gradually expand." My phone chimed with an incoming call from an unknown number. Normally, I would ignore such calls, but given the circumstances, I answered cautiously. "Pauline Bennett." "Bennett, this is Detective James Morales with Boston PD." The voice was professional, slightly tired. "Calling regarding a welfare check request for your daughter, Claire Whitmore. Her husband has reported concerns about her mental state and possible coercion. And so it begins," I thought, meeting Diane's eyes across the room. She immediately understood, moving closer to listen in. "My daughter is perfectly fine, Detective," I replied calmly. "In fact, she's right here with me and is under the protection of an emergency restraining order issued by Judge Winters earlier this evening due to domestic abuse concerns." There was a pause. Then the detective's tone shifted subtly. "Would it be possible for Me to speak with Mrs. Whitmore directly to confirm her well-being. Covered the phone. Police welfare check, I whispered to Claire. Stephen's first counter-move. Claire nodded, reaching for the phone. This is Claire Whitmore, she said, her voice remarkably steady. I'm safe and here of my own free will, Detective Morales. I left my husband's home last night after being forced to sit outside in freezing temperatures for over an hour as punishment for expressing an opinion at dinner. She listened for a moment, then continued. Yes, I've secured legal representation. Yes, the restraining order is legitimate. You can confirm with Judge Winters's office. No, I am not in any danger except from the Whitmore family. After a few more exchanges, she ended the call and handed the phone back to me. He's sending a patrol car to confirm in person. Standard procedure, he says. Diane nodded approvingly. Let them document your condition and state of mind. Every official record of you being rational and clear about your decision to leave strengthens our position. 2 officers arrived 30 minutes later. Woman in her 40s with the steady demeanor of a veteran cop and a younger male officer who seemed slightly starstruck to be inside one of Boston's most exclusive residential buildings. They spoke with Claire privately for several minutes, then briefly with me before departing with assurances they would document Claire's safety and sound mental state. One attempt neutralized, I noted as the door closed behind them. They'll try again, Claire warned. Different angles, different officials. The Whites have contacts throughout Boston's power structure. As if on cue, Marcus' monitoring program pinged with an alert. Incoming, he announced, scanning his screen. Whitmore family lawyer filed an emergency petition, alleging temporary insanity and undue influence. They're requesting an immediate psychological evaluation and temporary guardianship for Stephen. On what grounds? Diane demanded already. Reaching for her phone, Marcus read from the filing claims that Claire has a history of emotional instability, exacerbated by her estrangement from her mother, and that Pauline's sudden appearance triggered a psychotic break with reality. They're alleging that Pauline has a vendetta against the Whitmore family and has manipulated Claire's vulnerable mental state. Predictable, Diane scoffed, dialing rapidly and easily countered with the independent psychological evaluation we've already scheduled for tomorrow morning. Judge Winters won't grant temporary guardianship without clear evidence of incapacity. While Diane worked her legal magic, I sat beside Claire on the sofa. She was handling everything with remarkable composure, but I could sense the toll this rapid fire legal battle was taking. You should rest, I suggested gently. Tomorrow will be challenging. Shook her head. I can't. Not yet. There's something important I need to tell you about Project Prometheus. Caught my attention. What about it? Claire glanced toward Marcus and Diane, then lowered her voice. The documents you have are just the beginning. There's more. Much more. Douglas keeps a complete record of every transaction, every bribe, every shell company in a secure database that only he and his sons can access. How do you know this? Hint of the old Claire, the investigative journalist with a nose for hidden truths, flickered across her face. Because I may have been playing the perfect Whitmore wife on the outside, but I never completely lost myself. Listened. I remembered. She leaned closer. 3 months ago I overheard Stephen and Richard discussing a problem with one of the offshore accounts. Richard mentioned that Douglas was updating the master file. Later that night, I saw Stephen accessing a password protected database on his home computer. He was careless, Didn't realize I could see the reflection of his screen in the window. Did you see what was in it? I asked, impressed by her covert observation skills, despite everything she'd been through. Not details, but I saw enough to know it's comprehensive. Count numbers, contact information for officials they've bribed, dates of transactions, everything needed to establish a pattern of corruption. Considered the implications. If we could access that database, we'd have the ultimate leverage, Claire finished. But it's stored on a secure server in Douglas's home office. Physically accessing it would be nearly impossible. Especially now, Marcus approached, having caught the tail end of our conversation. Not necessarily. Impossible, he said thoughtfully. Every secure system has vulnerabilities. The question is whether we can find them before the whites escalate further. Diane ended her call, looking grimly satisfied. Crisis temporarily averted. Judge Winters has agreed to review our evidence before making any determination on their guardianship petition. But make no mistake, this is just the opening salvo. The Whitmores are mobilizing their considerable resources. Then we need to mobilize ours. I said, a plan already. Forming, and perhaps add some resources they don't know we have. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I rarely used. A direct line to Jonathan Pierce, investigative journalist at the Boston Globe and former colleague of Claire's. If the whites wanted to play hardball, they were about to discover they weren't the only ones who knew how to leverage connections and influence. The game was changing from defense to offense, and I had no intention of losing. Jonathan Pierce. Jonathan, it's Pauline Bennett, Claire's mother. Moment of silence then. Pauline, it's been 3 years? Since Claire's journalism award dinner. Is everything okay? It's Christmas. Claire needs your help, I said simply, knowing that direct honesty would be more effective with a veteran journalist than any elaborate explanation. Left Stephen Whitmore under difficult circumstances. The family is retaliating with everything they have. Jonathan muttered. I always wondered about that relationship. Claire was one of our brightest reporters. And suddenly she's quitting to become a corporate wife. Never sat right with me. Can you meet us tonight? To his credit, Jonathan didn't hesitate. Text me the address. I'll be there in 30. After ending the call, I turned to find Claire, watching me with a mixture of hope and anxiety. You called Jonathan? She asked. We haven't spoken since the Whitmore systematically cut you off from everyone in your former life, I finished. Gently. But Jonathan never bought the official story about you happily transitioning to corporate wifehood. He tried to reach out several times in your first year of marriage. I didn't know, she said quietly. Stephen screamed all my calls, messages. I thought everyone from my old life had just moved on. The simple admission revealed yet another layer of the isolation tactics employed by the whites. Not just preventing Claire from reaching out, but actively intercepting attempts by her former friends and colleagues to maintain connections. Jonathan arrived 45 minutes later, bearing the rumpled appearance of a man who lived for the story rather than appearances. His eyes widened slightly when he saw Claire, though he quickly masked his reaction. Good to see you, Bennett. He greeted her with the old nickname from her reporting days, his casual tone belying the concern evident in his expression. You too, Pierce, she replied, a ghost of her former professional persona surfacing briefly. After quick introductions to Diane and Marcus, we gathered around the dining table to brief Jonathan on the situation. To his immense credit, he listened without interruption as Claire detailed her gradual isolation within the Whitmore family, the controlling behaviors, and finally the incident that had catalyzed her escape. Classic high-control dynamics, he noted when she finished, echoing Diane's earlier assessment. I've covered cults with less effective isolation techniques. We need your help in 2 ways, I explained, laying out our strategy. First, as insurance, the White Circe will try to control the narrative, likely by painting Claire as unstable and me as manipulative. Having an independent journalist documenting our side creates counter-pressure, Jonathan nodded. And the second way, I glanced at Claire, who picked up the thread. You've been investigating the Whitmore family's business practices for years, she said. I remember you working on a story about their South Harbor development project right before I left the paper, which mysteriously got killed by editorial. After Douglas Whitmore had lunch with our publisher, Jonathan confirmed, his expression darkening. Not the first time. A Whitmore story got buried at the Globe. We have evidence, I said, choosing my words carefully. Substantial evidence. About a Whitmore operation called Project Prometheus. Offshore accounts, environmental violations, bribes to officials. Jonathan's eyes narrowed with journalistic interest. How substantial? Enough to trigger federal investigations, Diane interjected. But we're sitting on it temporarily as leverage for Claire's divorce and protection. We believe there's more evidence in a secure database in Douglas's home office, I continued. We could access it, we'd have the complete picture of their operations. Jonathan leaned back, studying us thoughtfully. So, you need me as both an insurance policy against character assassination and potentially to help break a major corruption story, assuming we can access this database. Precisely. Confirmed. He didn't hesitate. The Whitmores have been buying their way out of accountability for decades. Time someone held them responsible. Marcus, who had been monitoring his laptop throughout our conversation, suddenly straightened. Movement on the Whitmore front. They've called a family meeting at the mansion. All 3 brothers plus Douglas and their attorneys. How do you know that? Claire asked, impressed. I'm monitoring their email communications, he admitted. Technically borderline legal, but given the circumstances, they're planning their next move, Claire surmised, wrapping her arms around herself. Douglas won't accept defeat on any front. He'll be furious that the restraining order was granted. Good, Diane said firmly. Angry opponents make mistakes. We need them reactive rather than strategic. Jonathan pulled out a small notebook, jotting quick notes. What's our immediate plan? The psychological evaluation tomorrow establishes Claire's competence and counters their guardianship petition. What else? We need to secure Claire's personal belongings from the Whitmore house, I said. Important documents, meaningful items, anything that would be difficult to replace. Claire shook her head. They won't let anyone in to collect my things, and I can't go myself. With the restraining order in place. Actually, Diane corrected, the restraining order prevents them from approaching you, not vice versa. With a police escort, you have the legal right to retrieve your personal effects from the marital home. They'll find a way to block it, Claire insisted. Douglas has half the police department in his pocket. Not all of them, Jonathan said thoughtfully. I have a contact, Lieutenant Sandra Rivera. She heads the domestic violence unit and has a particular dislike for powerful men who think they're above the law. If I explain the situation, she might be willing to personally escort Claire. That could work, Diane agreed. But we need to Move quickly before the Whiters have time to hide or destroy anything important. Marcus raised a hand. Before we go. Charging into the lion's den, I have an idea about the database. Claire, you mentioned it's on a secure server in Douglas's office. Is it a physical server or cloud-based? Physical. Claire. Confirmed. Douglas doesn't trust cloud storage for his most sensitive information. He has a dedicated server in a locked closet off his home office. The sons have remote access through a VPN. Marcus' eyes lit with the particular enthusiasm of a tech specialist presented with an interesting challenge. If it's worked for remote access, there might be vulnerabilities we can exploit without physical presence. The Whitmores have top-tier cybersecurity, Claire warned. Everyone has blind spots, Marcus countered. Especially families who believe their money makes them untouchable. While they discussed technical possibilities, I stepped aside with Jonathan to strategize media angles. The Whitmores will try to bury this story, I warned. They have considerable influence over the Globe's management. He nodded grimly. Which is why we need to be prepared to go beyond the Globe if necessary. I have contacts at ProPublica and the Washington Post who would jump at a well-documented corruption story involving Boston's first family of values. The hypocrisy angle, I observed. Exactly. Douglas has spent decades positioning himself as the moral backbone of Boston's business community. He serves on ethics committees, gives speeches about family values, donates to conservative causes promoting traditional family structures. The contrast between that public persona and the private reality would be journalistic gold. As we rejoined the main group, Claire was outlining items she needed to retrieve from the Whitmore mansion. My personal laptop if they haven't already accessed or destroyed it, my grandmother's jewelry which Stephen keeps in their safe, my passport and birth certificate, and a leather journal I kept hidden in a compartment under the window seat in our bedroom. You kept a journal? I asked, surprised that she'd managed such an act of independence within the controlling environment. She nodded. Not consistently, and I was careful what I wrote, knowing they might find it. But there are entries documenting incidents over the years, punishments, controlling behaviors, things Douglas and Stevens said when they thought no one outside the family would ever hear. That could be extremely valuable as supporting evidence. Diane noted. If we can retrieve it, we'll find a way. Assured her. In the meantime, we should all try to rest. Tomorrow will require clear heads and steady nerves. As the others prepared for sleep, Marcus setting up his monitoring programs to alert us to any digital movements from the Whiters. Diane reviewing legal documents for the morning's court appearance. Jonathan making notes for potential future articles. I found Claire standing by the window looking out at Boston's nighttime skyline. Are you okay? I asked softly, joining her. I keep expecting to wake up, she admitted. To find myself back in that house, back in that life with all of this just a dream. It's not a dream, I assured her. You're free, Claire, and we're going to make sure you stay that way. She turned to me, eyes bright with unshed tears. Why didn't I leave sooner? How did I let them erase so much of who I was? Because they were experts at what they did, I said gently. They didn't start with locking you outside in the snow. They started with love and approval, then gradually introduced conditions for that love. By the time the control became obvious, you were already isolated from anyone who might have helped you recognize it. She nodded slowly, the frog in boiling water. Exactly. You're out now, and despite everything they did to diminish you, the real Claire Bennett, the strong, brilliant woman I raised, is still in there. She's the one who survived, who recognized the final line being crossed, who was ready to leave when the opportunity came. For the first time since I'd found her, trembling in the snow, Claire's smile reached her eyes. A small flicker of her authentic self emerging from beneath years of calculated suppression. The whites have no idea what they've unleashed, do they? She said, a hint of her old determination surfacing. No, I agreed, a fierce pride swelling in my chest. But they're about to find out. Dawn broke over Boston with crystal clarity, the kind of brilliant winter morning that follows a heavy snowfall. Pristine, sharp-edged, revealing. Felt fitting somehow. This new day that would begin the process of reclaiming Claire's life from the shadows the Whitmores had cast over it. The psychological evaluation was scheduled for 9:00 a.m. with Dr. Elder Kapoor, a forensic psychiatrist with impeccable credentials and a reputation for impartiality that made her assessments particularly valuable in court. Diane had secured the appointment through her network, emphasizing the urgent nature of our situation. Remember, Diane advised as Claire prepared, Dr. Capper isn't on our side or their side. Her job is to provide an unbiased professional assessment of your mental state. Be honest, be direct, and don't try to manage her impressions of you. Claire nodded, pulling her hair back into a simple ponytail. She declined the offer of new clothes for the appointment, choosing instead the comfortable sweater and jeans from the day before. No more performing, she'd explained. No more dressing for others. Approval. Dr. Kapoor's office was located in a converted brownstone in Cambridge. Its interior a careful balance of professional efficiency and calming warmth. The doctor herself projected a similar balance. Compassionate but not effusive, attentive but not intrusive. Will be conducting a standard evaluation to assess your current mental and emotional state. She explained to Claire, her tone matter-of-fact. This will include questions about recent events, your general history, and your decision-making process regarding your marriage. I understand time is of the essence, so we'll complete this in one extended session. Claire disappeared into the inner office while Diane, Jonathan, and I waited in the reception area. Tried to focus on reviewing documents for our next steps, but my mind kept returning to the years of isolation and control my daughter had endured while I had respected what I thought were her choices. Stop, Diane said quietly, observing my expression. I can see you blaming yourself from here. I should have done more, I admitted, pushed harder to maintain contact, questioned what was happening, and they would have used that to further convince Claire you were trying to control her, Diane countered. I've seen this pattern dozens of times, Pauline. These family systems are incredibly effective at turning a mother's concern into evidence of interference or instability. Is right, Jonathan added. I tried reaching out to Claire repeatedly that first year. Each time I got polite but firm responses clearly written by someone else, explaining that she was focusing on her new family priorities and would be in touch when time permitted. Eventually I stopped trying. The Whitmore isolation technique, Diane nodded. They didn't just cut Claire off from reaching out. They actively intercepted and managed incoming contact. Temps. 3 hours later, Claire emerged from Dr. Capper's office, looking drained, but composed. The doctor followed, her professional demeanor intact, though there was a new warmth in her eyes when she looked at Claire. I'll have my full assessment completed by this afternoon, she informed us. Given the urgency of the situation, I'll send it directly to Judge Winters with copies to Miss Abernathy without breaking confidentiality. I can say that I found no evidence whatsoever of the mental instability alleged in the Whitmore petition. Relief flooded through me with Dr. Capper's professional assessment. Countering the Whitmore's claims, their attempt to secure guardianship over Claire would almost certainly fail. "Thank you, Doctor," Claire said quietly. Dr. Capper regarded her with genuine compassion. "Miss Bennet, and I note, you requested I use your birth name rather than your married name. I would recommend ongoing therapeutic support as you navigate this transition. Not because there's anything wrong with your mental state, but because recovering from prolonged psychological control is a process that benefits from professional guidance. I'll consider that," Claire promised. Once things stabilize a bit, our next stop was Lieutenant Sandra Rivera's office at the Boston Police Department's Special Victims Unit. Jonathan had made the introduction, explaining enough of the situation to secure her interest without overwhelming her with details. Lieutenant Rivera was not what I had expected. Rather than the tough, hardened officer I'd imagined, she was a petite woman with a gentle manner that belied the steely determination evident in her eyes. Her office walls displayed not commendations, but photographs of survivors, women, children, occasionally men, who had escaped abusive situations. Mr. Pierce explained the basics. She said after introductions were complete, "You need a police escort to retrieve personal belongings from your marital home where a powerful family may attempt to obstruct you." Claire confirmed. "There is a restraining order in place, but it only prevents them from approaching me, not vice versa." Lieutenant Rivera nodded. "I've reviewed the order. Technically, any officer could accompany you, but given the Whitmore family's connections, I'll handle this personally." "Thank you," I said, grateful for her understanding of the power dynamics at play. "Don't thank me yet," she cautioned. "This won't be pleasant. Controlling individuals often become most dangerous when they feel their control slipping. The fact that your husband comes from a wealthy, influential family only increases the risk." "I understand the risk," Claire said firmly. "But there are things I need from that house. Documentation, personal items, evidence." Lieutenant Rivera studied her for a moment, then nodded. "We'll go today. The sooner the better before they have time to remove or destroy anything important." While Claire and the lieutenant worked out logistics for the retrieval operation, Marcus called with an update on his attempts to access the Whitmore database. "I've identified a potential entry point," he reported Stephen's remote access credentials. "Based on the email monitoring, he's not particularly careful with his cybersecurity. Uses similar passwords across multiple platforms. Leaves himself logged in on devices. Can you access the database with those credentials?" asked Hope, rising. "Not directly, not yet," he admitted. "There's multi-factor authentication involved, but if Claire can retrieve her laptop and it still has Stephen's fingerprints in the browser history, I might be able to piggyback on his previous access." 1. More reason to ensure the retrieval mission succeeded. By early afternoon, our small convoy approached the imposing gates of the Whitmore estate. Lieutenant Rivera's unmarked police vehicle, followed by my Volvo carrying Claire, Dan and me. Jonathan had stayed behind to coordinate with Marcus, both monitoring the situation remotely. The gates stood open as they had on Christmas Eve, though this time our arrival was expected. Lieutenant Rivera had called ahead, officially notifying the Whiters of our court-authorized visit to retrieve Claire's personal effects. "Remember," Diane cautioned as we drove up the long driveway. "Engage as little as possible. No arguments, no justifications, no defenses. Or here. For Claire's belongings, nothing more. The mansion loomed ahead, its manicured perfection now reading as sterile and oppressive to my eyes. Douglas's silver Bentley was parked prominently in the circular driveway, a calculated statement of his presence and authority. He didn't have to be here, Claire noted, tension evident in her voice. He's making a point by being present. Let him posture, Lieutenant Rivera said calmly. It changes nothing about our legal right to be here. As we parked, the massive front door opened to reveal Douglas Whitmore himself, flanked by a man I recognized as Edward Harrington, the family's legal counsel of Stephen. There was no sign, likely a strategic decision to avoid any potential violations of the restraining order. Lieutenant Rivera, Douglas acknowledged with cold civility as we approach. This is highly irregular and unnecessarily adversarial. If Mrs. Whitmore required personal items, a simple request would have sufficed. Mr. Whitmore, the lieutenant replied with professional detachment. We are here to execute a court-approved retrieval of Miss Bennet's personal property. This is standard procedure when a restraining order is in place. The deliberate use of Claire's maiden name was not lost on Douglas, whose jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Very well, Mr. Harrington will accompany you to ensure nothing beyond personal effects is removed. Actually, Lieutenant Rivera corrected, the court order specifies that Miss Bennet may retrieve her personal property without interference. You are welcome to observe from a reasonable distance, but you may not dictate or restrict which personal items she chooses to take. Douglas's mask of civility slipped for just a moment, revealing the cold anger beneath. This house and everything in it belongs to the Whitmore family. Claire may take her clothing and personal trinkets, nothing more. That's not what the law provides, Mr. Whitmore, Diane interjected smoothly. In a separation pending divorce, each party retains rights to their personal property, including gifts, inherited items, and professional materials. I watched Claire during this exchange, noting how she stood straighter with each passing moment, drawing strength from the solid legal ground beneath our feet. The Whitmores had spent years convincing her she had no rights, no recourse, no support system outside their carefully controlled environment. Now she was witnessing firsthand the limits of their power when confronted with legal authority. As we prepared to enter the mansion, Claire caught my eye, a silent message passing between us. Whatever happened inside, whatever we managed to retrieve or were forced to leave behind, she had already reclaimed the most important thing, her freedom, from the golden cage they had constructed around her. And not even Douglas Whitmore, with all his wealth and influence, could force her back inside it. The Whitmore mansion's interior hit me differently now, its opulence reading as oppressive rather than impressive. The perfect symmetry of the furnishings, the museum-like quality of the decor, the absence of any visible clutter or signs of actual living. It all spoke of control rather than comfort. Claire moved through the space with the careful navigation of someone in enemy territory, her posture alert, eyes constantly scanning. Lieutenant Rivera stayed close beside her while Diane and I followed a few steps behind. Douglas and his attorney maintained a watchful distance. Douglas's expression, a carefully constructed mask of dignified concern. We'll start with my personal items in the bedroom, Claire said, her voice steady, despite the tension evident in her shoulders. As we climbed the sweeping staircase to the second floor, I noticed small details. I'd missed during my brief confrontation on Christmas Eve. The way family photographs displayed only perfect posed moments. How even the fresh flower arrangements appeared identical throughout the house, as if stamped from a template. The absence of any books, magazines, or reading materials that might suggest independent thought. The master bedroom suite occupied the east wing of the second floor. A series of connected rooms including a sitting area, massive bedroom, walk-in closets, and a bathroom larger than some apartments. Here for the first time, there were visible signs of disruption, drawers partially open, items moved, the subtle evidence of someone having searched through belongings. "They've been through my things," Claire observed, her tone more resigned than surprised. "Looking for the journal, probably." Lieutenant Rivera made a note. "Do you see anything missing or damaged?" Claire scanned the room carefully. "Not immediately obvious, but I'll need to check specific hiding places." She moved with purpose to the window seat. An elegant built-in bench beneath bay windows overlooking the estate's manicured grounds. With practiced movements she pressed a nearly invisible seam in the wood paneling, revealing a small hidden compartment. "Empty," she reported, disappointment flashing across her face. "They found the journal." "Was there anything else hidden there?" Dan asked. "No, just Claire." Paused, a calculating expression replacing the disappointment. "Wait, they'd expect me to hide things there. It was too obvious." She crossed to the bookcase that occupied one wall of the sitting area, running her fingers along the spines of leather-bound classics that appeared more decorative than read. Selecting one, a volume of Austen that showed subtle signs of actual use. She opened it to reveal hollowed-out pages containing a small leather notebook. "The decoy worked," she said, relief evident in her voice as she tucked the notebook into her bag. "This is the real journal. I kept a fake one in the window seat in case they ever searched my things." "Smart," Lieutenant Rivera commented, genuine admiration in her tone. We continued the methodical collection of Claire's belongings. Clothing she actually liked rather than the designer pieces Stephen preferred. Personal mementos, professional materials from her journalism days that had survived the Whitmores' attempts to erase her previous identity. Each item went into suitcases and boxes under the watchful eyes of Douglas and his attorney, who remained silent but clearly seething at their inability to interfere. In Stephen's office, Claire retrieved her laptop from where it had been stored in a cabinet. "They've almost certainly accessed it," she warned. But Marcus said that might actually help him trace connection pathways to the main database. The most challenging retrieval came when Claire requested access to the safe in Douglas's office to collect her grandmother's jewelry. "Absolutely not," Douglas interjected, stepping forward for the first time. "My office and its contents are private. That area is not covered by your court order." Lieutenant Rivera turned to him with professional calm. "Mr. Whitmore, if the safe contains Miss Bennet's personal property, she has the legal right to retrieve it. Those jewels were reappraised and insured as Whitmore family assets after the marriage," Douglas countered. "They're no longer her personal property." "Blatantly false," Diane replied. "Inherited jewelry remains the separate property of the spouse who inherited it, regardless of insurance arrangements, unless there was a specific written agreement transferring ownership." "Was there Claire?" "No," Claire confirmed. "I was told the jewelry needed to be stored in the family safe for security reasons, but there was never any discussion of transferring ownership." Douglas's jaw tightened, but he recognized the legal quicksand he was approaching. With visible reluctance, he led us to his office, a masculine space of dark woods, leather furniture, and carefully curated symbols of power and success. The wall safe was concealed behind a painting of the original Whitmore patriarch, a configuration so stereotypically patriarchal, it would have been comical in any other context. Douglas entered, the combination with his body positioned to block our view, then stepped aside with ill-concealed hostility. "Take only what is verifiably yours," he warned as Claire approached the safe. Inside was a precisely organized collection of documents, cash, and jewelry boxes. Claire selected 3 velvet cases. Without hesitation, my grandmother's pearl necklace, her emerald earrings, and her wedding band she identified, opening each briefly to confirm its contents before placing them in her bag. As she turned to leave, her gaze fell on a locked metal box on Douglas's desk. For a moment she froze, recognition flashing in her eyes. "What is it?" Just quietly. "The external hard drive," she whispered. "It contains backup copies of the database." Douglas, sensing the shift in energy, moved toward his desk possessively. "We're finished here. You've retrieved your personal items as authorized." Lieutenant Rivera caught the exchange and positioned herself strategically. "Is there something else that belongs to you, Miss Bennett?" Claire hesitated, clearly calculating the risks of making claim. The hard drive wasn't technically her property, but it potentially contained crucial evidence of the Whitmore family's corruption. "No," she finally said, her eyes communicating something different to me. "I have what I came for." As we prepared to leave, boxes and suitcases loaded into our vehicles, Douglas made one final attempt to assert control. "This theatrical production changes nothing, Claire," he said, his voice pitched low, enough that only our immediate group could hear. "The Whitmore family has weathered far more serious challenges than a rebellious daughter-in-law. You would do well to remember that before this escalates further, it was a threat, thinly veiled but unmistakable. 5 days ago, such a statement might have intimidated Claire into compliance. Today she met his gaze directly. "I remember everything, Douglas," she replied, her voice steady. "Every conversation I wasn't supposed to hear, every document I wasn't supposed to see, every lesson on the proper place of Whitmore women. I remember it all." Something flickered in Douglas's expression, a momentary calculation, a reassessment of the threat she might actually pose. Before he could respond, Lieutenant Rivera smoothly guided Claire toward the waiting cars. "Time to go, Miss Bennett. We've completed the court-authorized retrieval." As we drove away from the mansion, Claire released a shaky breath, tension visibly draining from her shoulders. "I wasn't sure I could do that," she admitted. "Face him. Be in that house again without falling back into the old patterns." "You did brilliantly," I assured her, fierce pride filling my chest. "Did you get everything you needed?" "Most of it," she confirmed. "The journal is the most important. It documents instances of control, manipulation, discipline over the past 3 years. But I couldn't claim the hard drive, not with any legal justification." "But you saw it," I noted. "You confirmed its existence and location." A spark of her old journalistic sharpness flashed in her eyes. "Exactly. And I saw something else too. The unlock pattern Douglas used to access his computer. He always uses the same one. Specific sequence I've seen him trace hundreds of times when he thought no one was watching. That could be valuable information for Marcus," I observed. "More than valuable," Claire corrected. It might be the key to the entire database. As we return to our secure apartment, the retrieval mission officially complete, I recognize something new in my daughter's demeanor. A growing confidence, a reclamation of agency that each small victory reinforced. The Whitmores had spent years methodically dismantling her sense of self, her belief in her own perception and judgment. Each time their attempts at control were rebuffed, each time legal authorities acknowledged her rights, another piece of that conditioning fractured. The recovery of Claire's belongings was about more than physical items. It was about establishing that she existed independently of the Whitmore family's definition and control, that she had rights they couldn't override, boundaries they couldn't violate, and allies they couldn't intimidate. Douglas had issued his warning, believing himself still in the position of power. What he failed to understand was that the dynamic had already shifted fundamentally. Claire was no longer the isolated, undermined woman who could be controlled through calculated doses of approval and punishment. She was becoming step by step her true self again, and that was the one thing the Whitesers had always feared most. "I think I'm in," Marcus announced, his voice tight with suppressed excitement. It was just past midnight, nearly 18 hours since our return from the Whitmore mansion. Marcus had been working continuously since then, using Claire's retrieved laptop to trace pathways into the Whitmore family secure network. A combination of Stephen's cached credentials, Douglas's unlock pattern that Claire had memorized, and Marcus' technical expertise had finally yielded results. We gathered around his workstation. Claire, Jonathan, Diane, and I, watching as file directories populated his screen. "Is that it?" Claire asked, leaning forward. Prometheus database. "Part of it," Marcus confirmed, navigating through encrypted folders with practiced precision. "Douglas is methodical. I'll give him that. Everything's organized by year, then by project, then by transaction type. It's an auditor's dream or nightmare, depending on whose side you're on." "Can you download it?" Jonathan asked, the journalist in him clearly itching to dig into the material. "Not all at once. It would trigger security alerts, but I can extract key files if you tell me what to look for." Claire studied the directory structure, her face illuminated by the screen's blue glow. "Start with South Harbor," she suggested. "That was the development project I questioned at Christmas dinner, the one that got me sent outside. If they reacted that strongly, there must be something particularly damning there." Marcus navigated to the indicated folder, revealing dozens of subfolders with clinical labels: permits, zoning, displaced residents, compensation, official payments. Official payments. Diane raised an eyebrow. "That sounds suspiciously like a euphemism for bribes." "'Cause it is," Marcus confirmed, opening the folder to reveal spreadsheets listing names, dates, amounts, and payment methods. City councilors, zoning officials, even the head of the Community Development Board, all receiving consulting fees through shell companies. Jonathan was already taking notes, his expression grim. "This is textbook corruption. They're systematically bribing officials to approve a development that's displacing an entire low-income community." As Marcus continued exploring the database, the true scope of the Whitmore family's operations became clear. Project Prometheus wasn't just one scheme, but an entire shadow business infrastructure, designed to facilitate corruption while maintaining plausible deniability. "They've been doing this for decades," Claire said, her voice hollow as she recognized names and projects from conversations she'd overheard during her years in the Whitmore home. The same pattern over and over: identify vulnerable communities, bribe officials to change zoning or override environmental protections, displace residents with minimal compensation, develop luxury properties and reap enormous profits, all while positioning themselves as ethical business leaders and philanthropists. I added, thinking of the numerous charity galas and civic awards the Whiters hosted and received. The hypocrisy is breathtaking, Jonathan agreed, but not surprising. In my experience, the louder someone proclaims their moral superiority, the more likely they're compensating for something. Marcus had moved to a different section of the database, one labeled simply Insurance. Inside were detailed doses on various officials, business competitors, and journalists who had crossed paths with the Whitmores over the years. My God, Claire breathed, recognizing the implications immediately. It's blackmail material. They keep dirt on anyone who might threaten their interests. Sure enough, each file contained meticulously documented vulnerabilities, evidence of affairs, financial improprieties, family secrets, substance abuse issues, all carefully catalogued for potential leverage. Is there a file on me? Jonathan asked, only half joking. Marcus typed quickly, running a search. Actually, yes. Under media threats. Several journalists are listed. Jonathan's file was relatively thin compared to others. Notes about his divorce 5 years earlier. His son's struggles with ADHD, financial pressures from medical bills. They were looking for pressure points, Jonathan realized. Ways to influence or discredit me if my reporting got too close to their operations. There's one on you too, Pauline, Marcus said quietly, opening another file. I leaned forward, curious what the Whites might have compiled about me. The file contained basic biographical information, notes about my consulting business, and particular emphasis on my separation from Claire. They've been monitoring you since before Claire married Stephen, Marcus observed, scrolling through time-stamped entries. Especially your client relationships and business contacts. They saw you as a threat from the beginning, Claire said, the realization dawning in her voice. Because you represent everything they oppose. A successful independent woman who raised a daughter with the same values. Not successfully enough, apparently, I replied, the old guilt surfacing briefly. Claire squeezed my hand. The fact that they needed this much effort to separate us, to control me, that proves how strong the foundation was that you built. This emotional exchange unfolded. Marcus had continued exploring the database. There's something else here, he said, opening a folder labeled contingencies. It looks like response plans, protocols. 4 different scenarios that might threaten their operations. The folder contained detailed strategies for handling various crises, investigations by journalists or regulatory agencies, challenges from community organizations, even internal threats like family members becoming problematic. Claire pointed to one file labeled Wife Management. With growing horror we read through what amounted to a family playbook for controlling the women who married into the Whitmore family. Isolation techniques, financial restriction methods, psychological manipulation strategies, all clinically detailed, as if discussing business operations rather than human relationships. This is Diane seemed momentarily at a loss for words despite her extensive experience with high-control divorce cases. This is beyond controlling. This is systematic emotional abuse documented and institutionalized across generations. There are similar files for each brother's wife, Marcus noted, navigating through the folder, including a specific one for Claire. Claire's file was the most extensive, containing notes on her problematic independence, her excessive attachment to her mother, and her dangerous professional background in investigative journalism. It outlined a 5-year plan for gradually reshaping her into a proper Whitmore wife with specific milestones for reducing her independence. Year 3 complete. Professional disengagement. Year 4 full financial dependence established. Year 5 pregnancy to cement family commitment. Claire read aloud, her voice growing steadier rather than more distressed with each revealed detail. They had my entire life mapped out, without my knowledge or consent. This isn't just controlling behavior, Jonathan said, his journalistic detachment giving way to genuine anger. This is methodical psychological manipulation documented in their own words, in their own files. It's also exactly what we need. Diane interjected, professional focus cutting through the emotional impact of the revelations. This database provides irrefutable evidence for Claire's divorce case and potential civil claims against the entire family and criminal charges. Lieutenant Rivera added from the doorway where she had joined us unnoticed during our absorption with the database. We had invited her to review our findings given her professional expertise with domestic abuse cases. The bribery and corruption are clear criminal violations, she continued, studying the screen over Marcus' shoulder. But this wife management program potentially constitutes conspiracy to commit psychological abuse and coercive control, which is recognized as domestic violence in Massachusetts as of last year's legislative update. Can we use this legally? I asked, turning to Diane. Given how we obtained it, Diane's expression was thoughtful. The database access is legally problematic for criminal prosecution, fruit of the poisonous tree and all that, but for Claire's divorce and civil protection, there's precedent for admitting improperly obtained evidence when it directly relates to physical safety and well-being. We have another option, Jonathan added. Journalistic reporting. The laws protecting journalists' sources would allow me to report on the contents, without specifying how they were obtained. And once it's public through legitimate journalism, Lieutenant Rivera noted, law enforcement could initiate investigations based on the published information rather than the original access method. As the discussion continued about legal strategies and journalistic approaches, I watched Claire. Rather than appearing traumatized by the revelations about how comprehensively she had been manipulated, she seemed to be growing more centered, more resolute with each new detail. "Are you okay?" I asked, quietly, while the others debated tactical options. She met my eyes, and I saw something I hadn't fully seen since before her marriage. Clarity, determination, and the sharp intelligence that had once made her such a formidable journalist. "I'm better than okay," she said. "For 5 years I've been gaslighted into doubting my own perceptions, my own memories. I kept thinking maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe their way was normal and I just couldn't adapt properly." She gestured toward the screen, displaying the cold clinical details of her own planned psychological subjugation. "This proves I wasn't crazy. Everything I felt, everything I sensed, but couldn't quite articulate. It was all real. They really were. Systematically dismantling who I was, deliberately and with full awareness." Understanding dawned. For Claire, these horrifying documents weren't just evidence for legal proceedings. They were validation of her own reality, confirmation that her perceptions had been accurate despite years of being told otherwise. "We have everything we need now," she said, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in years. "Let's end this." The Whitmore family had spent generations building their empire on corruption, control, and the systematic suppression of anyone who threatened their power, particularly the women who married into their fold. They had documented their methods meticulously, never imagining their carefully guarded secrets would be exposed. Confidence would prove to be their downfall. And Claire, the problematic wife they had tried so methodically to break, would be the catalyst for their unraveling. "They filed a cybersecurity complaint," Diane announced, striding into the apartment the next morning with her usual purposeful energy. "Douglas Whitmore is claiming his private servers were illegally accessed and his confidential business information compromised. We had been expecting this, the Whitmore family's first counter-move once they discovered the database breach. Marcus had deliberately left subtle traces of the access, a calculated risk we'd agreed upon to strengthen our position for what would come next. "Has he specified what was accessed?" Jonathan asked, looking up from his laptop where he'd been drafting the framework of his expose. "Interestingly, no," Diane replied, setting her briefcase on the dining table. "The complaint is deliberately vague about the contents, refers only to proprietary business information and confidential family documents. Because he can't admit what's actually in those files," Claire observed. "He can't tell the police someone accessed our documented evidence of systematic corruption and psychological manipulation." I smiled at the clarity in Claire's analysis. With each passing day, she was reclaiming more of herself, emerging from the fog of manipulation that had enveloped her for 5 years. The confident journalist's instincts, the sharp critical thinking, all returning as the Whitmore conditioning lost its hold. "Exactly," Diane confirmed. "They're in a bind. Pursue serious charges for the breach. They would need to specify what was accessed and why it matters. But doing so would expose the very content they're desperate to keep hidden." "What's our next move?" asked, surveying our impromptu war room, the dining area now covered with laptops, legal documents, and strategically organized evidence. "We move first," Jonathan declared, turning his laptop to show us the draft article he'd been refining throughout the night. "The expose is ready. Coordinated with my editor at the Globe and secured a commitment that Douglas can't kill this one. Too many people involved now. Too much documentation." The headline was stark in its simplicity. The Whitmore family's shadow empire. Corruption, control, and coercion behind Boston's first family. "When does it run?" Claire asked, scanning the comprehensive article that detailed the Whitmore family's decades of systematic corruption, their manipulation of city officials, their exploitation of vulnerable communities, and most damningly, their documented strategies for controlling and isolating the women who married into their family. "Tomorrow's front page," Jonathan confirmed. "Digital version goes live at midnight tonight. We're coordinating with the Washington Post for national coverage and follow-up investigations. Douglas will try to block publication," I cautioned. "Let him try," Jonathan replied with the confidence of a journalist on solid ethical ground. "The evidence is overwhelming. The public interest is clear, and we've structured it to withstand legal challenges. Multiple editors have reviewed and approved it. The publisher is on board and we've consulted the PAP's legal team extensively." While Jonathan finalized his bombshell article, Diane outlined Our parallel legal strategy. We filed an amended petition with Judge Winters, documenting the newly discovered evidence of systematic emotional abuse and coercive control. The journal entries combined with the Whitmore family's own documented wife management protocols present a compelling case for expedited divorce proceedings and comprehensive protective orders. What about criminal charges? Lieutenant Rivera asked, having joined us again this morning in her unofficial capacity. That's where we need your official involvement, Diane explained. Once Jonathan's article breaks, it creates a public record that law enforcement can use as the basis for launching investigations into the corruption, the bribery, potentially even conspiracy charges related to the coercive control patterns. Lieutenant Rivera nodded thoughtfully. I've already briefed my captain. We'll be ready to move once the article provides public cause for investigation. As these various strategic threads came together, I marveled at the coalition we had assembled in just a few days. Legal, journalistic, technical, and law enforcement expertise, all aligned to expose and dismantle the corrupt system the Whiters had built over generations. They'll retaliate, Claire warned. Her intimate knowledge of the family's tactics, informing her concern, not just legally, but personally. Character, assassination, pressure on employers, threats to connections. We've anticipated that, I assured her. Sharing the contingency plans we developed. Marcus has secured our digital lives against intrusion. Diane has documented all potential threats for restraining order purposes. Jonathan's article includes preemptive responses to likely Whitmore attacks on our credibility, and I've arranged police protection for the apartment building, Lieutenant Rivera added. Just as a precaution, Claire absorbed this comprehensive preparation, something like wonder crossing her face. I forgot what it's like, she said softly. What's like? Yes. Having people in your corner, having support that isn't contingent on compliance. Her voice strengthened. For 5 years, every relationship in my life came with conditions. Behave appropriately. Don't question. Accept your place. I forgot what unconditional support feels like. The simple observation highlighted perhaps the most insidious aspect of the Whitmores' control system. The way it had isolated Claire not just physically from outside relationships, but psychologically from the very concept of non-transactional human connection. As evening approached, the final preparations for our coordinated offensive fell into place. Jonathan submitted his article for publication. Diane filed our amended legal petitions, and Lieutenant Rivera arranged for additional patrol coverage of our building overnight. A precaution against potential Whitmore retaliation once the article went live. Get some rest, I advised Claire as the others departed. Tomorrow will be intense. Not sure I can sleep, she admitted, the nervous energy of anticipation evident in her restless movements. Claire encouraged, you'll need your strength and clarity tomorrow. While Claire attempted to rest, I sat by the window, overlooking Boston's nighttime skyline, reflecting on the extraordinary series of events that had brought us to this moment. Just 1 week ago, I had been driving through a snowstorm, following an inexplicable maternal instinct that something was wrong with my daughter. Now we stood on the precipice of exposing one of Boston's most powerful families and liberating Claire from their control permanently. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Cautiously I opened it. Mrs. Bennett, this is Ella Laner Whitmore. Need to speak with you urgently, away from Douglas and the family. Please, it's about Claire Ella Stevens. Mother, Douglas's wife of nearly 40 years. The quintessential Whitmore matriarch. What could she possibly want? That couldn't be communicated through the family's army of lawyers and representatives. Before I could contemplate a response, a second text arrived. I know what they did to Claire. I know because they did it to me 2 decades ago. Please, I have information that could help protect her. I stared at the message, assessing its authenticity and the potential risks of engagement. Ella Lehner had always presented as the perfect Whitmore wife, unfailingly poised, differential to Douglas, a model of traditional femininity within their patriarchal structure. Could this outreach be genuine, or was it another Whitmore manipulation tactic? As I deliberated, a third message appeared. The article goes live at midnight. Tomorrow morning, everything changes for all of us. Before that happens, there are things Claire should know about the family, about the other wives, about how far Douglas might go to protect the Whitmore name. Please, 1 hour, the Common Ground Cafe on Cambridge Street. I'll be alone. The specificity of the request, the acknowledgement of the impending article, and the apparent desire to meet in a public place, all suggested sincerity. Yet caution was essential. The Whiters had proven themselves masters of manipulation and deception. I made a decision, texting back. If you're serious, I'll meet you, but not alone, and I choose the location. Her response was immediate. Anywhere public, anyone you trust. Just please before midnight. I glanced at the clock. 10:18 p.m. Less than 2 hours until Jonathan's expose would irrevocably change the landscape for everyone connected to the Whitmore family. If Ella Lehner truly had information that could help protect Claire, this might be our only opportunity to obtain it. I'll bring Lieutenant Sandra Rivera from Boston PD, I responded, adding an additional layer of security to the meeting. Fine, came Eleanor's reply. Thank you. I called Lieutenant Rivera, who agreed to accompany me without hesitation. We selected a 24-hour diner near the police station. Neutral territory with plenty of witnesses and security cameras. They prepared to leave. I paused by Claire's bedroom door, listening to her steady breathing. She had finally fallen asleep. The weight of years of psychological control temporarily lifted in unconsciousness. I decided not to wake her. If Ella Lehner's information proved valuable, I would share it when Claire awoke. If it was a trap, there was no reason to expose her to additional stress. Whatever Ella Lehner Whitmore wanted to share in these final hours, before her family's carefully constructed facade collapsed, I would hear it cautiously, strategically, and with Claire's protection as my absolute priority. The game had changed. We were no longer merely reacting to Whitmore maneuvers. We were dictating the terms of engagement. And now, unexpectedly, it seemed at least one member of the Whitmore inner circle might be breaking ranks. The story continues in the next chapter in the next linked video. But first, I need you to subscribe to join the family, as we are looking forward to hit our first 10,000 subscribers target, and feel free to share your story in the comments. You matter, your voice does too.